Welcome to Liberation Lens, where stories unfold beyond the headlines and perspective truly matters. History isn't finished, it's unfolding. This is Liberation Lens. Perspective matters.
In an age where human rights are spoken louder than they are practiced, one man's voice for the forgotten has become too inconvenient to ignore. Dr. Cho Ayaba, a seasoned activist and international law scholar, has spent decades advocating for the independence of the Southern Cameroons, aka Ambazonia. His arrest in Norway in September 2024, on allegations of inciting crimes against humanity, has sparked global outrage. But this is not a story of justice. It is a story of geopolitics. Norway, a nation that proudly wears the badge of peace, democracy, and socialism, now finds itself detaining a man without formal charge. At the same time, it's extending trade and investment ties with Cameroon's authoritarian regime. According to the Cameroon Conflict Human Rights Report 2022-23, state forces in Cameroon have committed widespread abuses. These include torture, arbitrary arrests, and massacres, particularly in the Anglophone regions, aka Ambazonia, where Ayaba's movement is rooted. Meanwhile, Norway's government pension fund Global, managed by Norges Bank, has been scrutinized for its investments in companies like Barlour SE. Barlour SE is a French multinational that operates in Cameroon and have been linked to human rights violations on palm oil plantations. Despite recommendations for exclusion by Norway's Council on Ethics, which advises the government pension fund Global on responsible investment practices, Norway opted for active ownership rather than divestment, raising questions about its ethical posture. Note that Norway is also shareholder of Barlour SE's parent company, Compagnie de la Dette SE. So, not surprisingly, many have hinted that Ayaba's detention is not about law but about leverage, coming amid Norway's quiet diplomatic and commercial engagement with Cameroon. While neither country maintains embassies in the other, Norway operates consulates in Douala and Yaoundé, and has long-standing missionary and cultural ties. Critics argue that Ayaba's arrest serves as a political concession to Cameroon's government, which has faced international condemnation for its brutal suppression of the Anglophone independence movement. This is the story of colonial betrayal, Western hypocrisy, and the criminalization of resistance in the service of capital. Ayaba's case is emblematic of a broader pattern, where liberation movements are branded as terrorism, and where Western democracies, under the guise of neutrality, silence voices that challenge the post-colonial status quo. As Karina Schmidt writes in From Colonialism to International Aid, 2020, Cold War powers shaped global social and political systems not just through ideology, but through strategic design. This is a legacy that continues to influence who gets protected, and who gets punished. But before we continue, let's get to know Dr. Cho Ayaba. Who is the man? Critics say Dr. Cho Ayaba is not a warlord. He is not a criminal. He is an international human rights law expert, a human rights advocate, and a leading voice in the global struggle for decolonization. His journey from student activism to international diplomacy reflects a lifelong commitment to justice, not violence. Born in August 1972 in Cameroon's northwest region, Ayaba was expelled from the University of Buea in 1993 for leading a solo protest against tuition hikes. This act of defiance marked the beginning of his exile and political awakening. He obtained political asylum in Germany, and later settled in Norway. Far from being a militant, Ayaba has consistently framed the Ambazonian struggle within the bounds of international law. As president of the Ambazonia Governing Council, AGOC, an independence movement formed in 2013, he has championed peaceful resistance, diplomatic engagement, and legal advocacy. The AGOC's mission is to liberate the former British Southern Cameroons, Ambazonia, from annexation by Cameroon and establish a sovereign, democratic state. Despite the AGOC's armed wing, the Ambazonia Defense Forces, ADF, Ayaba's leadership has emphasized diplomacy and international legitimacy. Within the remit of international law and UN principles, Dr. Ayaba emphasizes the Ambazonian people's right to self-determination. This is under Article 1(2) of the UN Charter, which enshrines the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. He also invokes UN General Assembly Resolution 1514-15, the landmark 1960 Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples. This resolution affirms that all peoples have the right to self-determination and that subjection of peoples to alien subjugation, domination and exploitation constitutes a denial of fundamental human rights. Ayaba's legal and diplomatic framing of the Ambazonian cause challenges the narrative that equates separatism with criminality. His advocacy aligns with precedents in international law, including the International Court of Justice's recognition of self-determination as an erga omnes obligation, a duty owed to the international community as a whole. It is also worth knowing that Ayaba is also the author of Not Guilty, an African refugee experience. This is a memoir chronicling his journey through Europe's asylum system and the broader challenges faced by African dissidents in exile. Above all, his writings and speeches reflect a deep understanding of the intersection between colonial history, refugee rights, and global justice. That said, let's now focus on Southern Cameroon's Ambazonia. Is it a betrayed trusteeship? Critics say the answer is obvious. They argue that Ambazonia is not secessionist. They say it is colonially occupied. Historically, the territory known as British Southern Cameroons was a United Nations Trust territory under British administration, from 1946 to 1961, distinct from French Cameroon. It was never legally integrated into the La République du Cameroun, and no binding treaty of union exists between the two entities. Critics argue that the 11th of February 1961 UN-organized plebiscite offering Southern Cameroonians two options at independence, join Nigeria or join Cameroon, was a misinterpreted mandate. Crucially, independence as a standalone state was not offered, despite being the preferred outcome for many. According to Professor Carlson Anyangwe, a leading international law scholar, the plebiscite did not unite Southern Cameroons with Cameroon. It merely terminated trusteeship. The vote was not a legal act of union, nor did it authorize annexation. The UN General Assembly Resolution 1608-15 endorsed the termination of trusteeship but failed to ensure a formal treaty of union. As Anyangwe notes, French Cameroon was not party to the plebiscite, and no referendum was held on its side to ratify any union. The absence of a ratified treaty means that Cameroon's continued presence in Ambazonia constitutes a de facto occupation, not a legal federation. So, based on Anyangwe and Ayaba's arguments, let's look at southern Cameroon's, Ambazonia's legal status vis-à-vis international boundaries. History has it that Ambazonia's borders were clearly defined by international treaties, including the 1913 Anglo-German Agreement, and the 1931 Franco-British Declaration. These boundaries were never legally dissolved. Even after the 1st of October 1961, the date set by the UN for trusteeship termination, that is, when Ambazonia purportedly gained independence by joining Cameroon, Cameroon maintained customs and security barriers along the frontier, reinforcing its international character. Based on these historical facts, one would deduce that Dr. Cho Ayaba's call is a call of territorial justice and legal redress, not war. His advocacy invokes UN Charter Article 1-2 and General Assembly Resolution 1514, which affirm the right of colonized peoples to self-determination. Proponents have further argued that the Ambazonian struggle is framed not as rebellion, but a demand for the completion of a failed decolonization process. And corroborating the Cameroon Conflict Human Rights Report 2022-23, AGOV's documentation confirms that Cameroon's military occupation has led to widespread human rights violations, including arbitrary arrests, torture, and extrajudicial killings. These actions, critics say, further underscore the illegitimacy of Cameroon's presence, and the urgency of international intervention. If such is the case, critics are asking, why has Norway, a self-declared bastion of peace, detained a man whose only weapon is international law? To many, the answer lies in trade. Norway's reputation as a humanitarian leader masks a deeper entanglement with regimes that violate the very principles it claims to uphold. Since 2015, Norwegian exports to Cameroon have surged, particularly in refined petroleum, maritime equipment, and gas technologies. In 2021 alone, Norway exported over $70 million in refined petroleum to Cameroon, making it one of the top export categories. This trade supports Cameroon's energy infrastructure, which is tightly controlled by the Baye regime, a government widely criticized for corruption, repression, and human rights abuses. Besides, there is growing Norwegian corporate footprint in Cameroon. Its companies such as Golar LNG have played a direct role in Cameroon's extractive sector. In 2015, Golar LNG signed an agreement to convert one of its tankers into a floating LNG production unit off the coast of Cameroon. Aligned to the deal, Gazprom Marketing and Trading Singapore secured an 8-year off-take deal for all liquefied natural gas produced. This project, backed by Cameroon's state oil firm SNH and Perenco Cameroon, was greenlit with Norway's technical and logistical support. Meanwhile, Norwegian Energy Trading, a broker firm with offices in Singapore and Miami, has expanded its footprint in West Africa, offering integrated bunker procurement and maritime logistics services. These services are vital to Cameroon's shipping and oil distribution networks, industries often linked to elite patronage under Baye's rule. Also, according to data from the Observatory of Economic Complexity, Norway's exports to Cameroon have grown at an annualized rate of 15.6% between 1995 and 2021. These include not only fuels and machinery but also boat propellers, non-fillet frozen fish, and chemical products, all essential to Cameroon's industrial and military logistics. Do you now get it? Do you now understand why Norway is detaining Dr. Ayaba even without charge? By detaining Dr. Ayaba, Norway sends a quiet but unmistakable message to Yaoundé: we won't get in the way. The arrest aligns with a broader pattern of Western states prioritizing economic access over ethical accountability. Norway's silence on Cameroon's Anglophone crisis, despite documented atrocities, further underscores this complicity. As such, the message is clear. This is not diplomacy. It's complicity. Do you now see that Ayaba's detention is not an isolated incident? It is part of a global trend. It is the trend where activists challenging post-colonial power structures are criminalized, while states with strategic resources are shielded from scrutiny. Norway's actions reflect a calculated choice. Protect trade routes, not human rights. You may not have known? But this attitude of Norway is in line with its global pattern of selective justice. This isn't Norway's first time on the wrong side of justice. Despite its image as a peaceful, egalitarian society, Norway has repeatedly aligned itself with military interventions and geopolitical maneuvers that contradict its humanitarian branding. The pattern is clear. Socialism. That is, social security for all at home. Imperial utility abroad. Let me give you some examples. Are you aware that in 2011, from March 23 to October 31, Norway participated in NATO's military intervention in Libya under Operation Unified Protector? If not, know this. Norway flew 588 bombing sorties. Do you understand what that means? It means that Norway carried out 588 military flight bombing missions in Libya, accounting for roughly 15 to 18% of NATO's total airstrikes on Libya. Norwegian F-16s dropped precision-guided bombs, yet had no role in selecting targets, leaving strategic decisions to other NATO members. Yes. Imagine, therefore, the number of bombing sorties carried out in Libya just to bring down Muammar Gaddafi. Crazy, isn't it? The intervention, initially framed as a humanitarian mission to protect civilians, ultimately led to the collapse of Libya's statehood. It led to the killing of Muammar Gaddafi, and a descent into civil war and militia rule. A 2018 report by the Norwegian Libya Commission acknowledged that during the bombings, Norway lacked independent intelligence yet made hasty decisions based on NATO briefings. Quite sad. Let's now look at her involvement in Afghanistan. We term it logistics over liberation. Norway's involvement in Afghanistan spanned 2 decades, 2001 to 2021, making it one of the country's longest military engagements since World War II. While publicly supporting NATO's mission to stabilize Afghanistan, Norway also benefited from logistics contracts, military base agreements, and defense cooperation frameworks with the United States. The Supplementary Defense Cooperation Agreement, 2022, formalized U.S. access to Norwegian bases, reinforcing Norway's role as a strategic logistics partner in global conflicts. Critics argue that Norway's participation in Afghanistan was more about geopolitical alignment and defense industry gains than genuine peace-building. How about their involvement in Ukraine? We refer to it as morality meets market. In Ukraine, Norway presents a moral front, condemning Russia's aggression and supporting Kyiv's defense. But behind the solidarity lies a booming arms trade and energy windfall. In 2024, Norway authorized direct weapons sales to Ukraine, allowing defense firms to bypass donation channels and profit from the war effort. Would you say she is just being smart? Also note that Norway has emerged as Europe's largest supplier of natural gas, filling the void left by Russian sanctions and reaping record profits. Its energy exports, especially LNG and crude oil, have surged, with fossil fuels comprising over 70% of Norway's export value in 2022. This duality, moral support paired with economic gain, raises questions about Norway's true motivations. Is it defending democracy, or defending its market share? Could be both, though. However, Norwegian political scientist, Ola Tunende, has long critiqued this paradox. In his writings on geopolitics and the dual state, Tunende argues that Norway often walks the line between moral branding and imperial utility. He describes a political Norway that champions peace, and a military Norway that quietly supports Western hegemony. His analysis of Norway's role in Libya, Afghanistan, and NATO reveals a troubling pattern. Decisions made in haste, guided by alliance loyalty, and justified through humanitarian rhetoric, even when the outcomes are destabilization and suffering. With these facts, how does one plead the case for justice for Dr. Cho Ayaba? Critics and advocates have proven that Dr. Cho Ayaba's detention is not merely unlawful. They hold it as ideological persecution. They suggest that he embodies everything imperial systems fear. As a trained international law and human rights advocate, Ayaba has used legal frameworks, not violence, to challenge colonial legacies. Self-defense must not be equated to violence. Armed self-defense against an occupier is recognized as a right under international law, particularly when tied to the broader principle of self-determination. Ayaba's unwavering commitment to peaceful resistance and territorial justice exposes the contradictions of states that preach human rights but practice repression. Ayaba represents the Ambazonian people's demand for self-determination, a right enshrined in international law but denied in practice. The UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, 1998, affirms the right of individuals and groups to peacefully advocate for national liberation and human rights. Article 1 of the Declaration states, "Everyone has the right, individually and in association with others, to promote and to strive for the protection and realization of human rights and fundamental freedoms. This includes the right to challenge colonial occupation, advocate for self-determination, and expose state abuses." Precisely the work Ayaba has undertaken. Meanwhile, Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICPRA, guarantees the right to hold opinions without interference. The right to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds. The right to political dissent, including criticism of governments and advocacy for alternative governance models. These protections are not optional. Norway is a signatory to the ICPRA and has ratified the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders. By detaining Ayaba without charge, it violates both its legal obligations and its moral commitments. Therefore, advocates assert very firmly that Norway's detention of Ayaba is a betrayal of its own identity. This assertion is backed by the fact that Norway is a country that hosts the Nobel Peace Prize, funds global human rights initiatives, and brands itself as a champion of democracy. Unfortunately, it now stands accused of silencing an advocate for liberation. This is not justice. It is complicity. Ayaba's case is a litmus test for the international community. Will legal advocacy for decolonization be protected, or punished? Will Western democracies uphold the rights they claim to defend, or will they bend to the pressures of trade and geopolitics? In conclusion, we advise that every empire has its enablers. But history does not remember those who upheld injustice. It remembers the voices that stood against it. International law asserts that Dr. Cho Ayaba is not a criminal. He is a defender of the voiceless, a scholar of law, a survivor of exile, and a symbol of Ambazonia's unyielding hope. His arrest marks more than a legal misstep. It marks the moral failing of a system that protects power, not principle. For if international law does not protect the vulnerable, then it is merely a convenience for the powerful. The United Nations Charter, the ICPRA, the Declaration of Human Rights Defenders. These are not decorative texts. They are commitments, ones Norway now stands in violation of. To Norway, the advice is: you cannot detain justice. You cannot silence memory. You cannot profit from silence. From the hills of Boya to the snowy corridors of Oslo, the call echoes louder. Free Dr. Cho Ayaba. Support the freedom of Ambazonia. This is Liberation Lens Perspective Matters.
You have just seen the world through a different lens. Subscribe, comment, share, and help amplify voices that deserve to be heard. Until next time, keep looking deeper. Liberation Lens Perspective Matters.